A guy delivering organs or hospital transplants hits something in the road with his car. He gets out to check if they're okay. They are not okay. They are, in fact, already dead and extremely interested in eating him. That's the first 30 seconds of the new trailer for Zack Cregger's Resident Evil, and honestly, it might be the most confident 30 seconds this franchise has had in over 2 decades. If you've been burned before by Resident Evil movies, and let's be honest, most of us have, stick around, because this trailer is doing something genuinely different. It's stacked with Easter eggs that prove the director actually knows this game series inside and out. And there's one specific detail in here that longtime fans are calling one of the deepest cuts a video game movie has ever attempted. I'm breaking down every reference, every callback, and every reason this might finally be the Resident Evil adaptation fans have been begging for since 2002. Let's get into it. Let's start with the basics, because Cregger has built this movie around a genuinely clever premise. Our protagonist is Bryan, played by Abrams. We will recognize from Euphoria and more recently, from Cregger's own weapons. Bryan is not a special forces operative. He's not a zombie hunting mercenary. He's not carrying a rocket launcher in a trench coat. Bryan is a medical courier. His entire job is driving coolers full of organs between hospitals before a clock runs out. Try and get life-saving transplants to the people who need them in time. That's it. That's the guy. And on the night the movie takes place, he picks up what looks like a routine job, one that happens to pay double his usual rate. A catch? The delivery is headed straight into Raccoon City, just as a certain viral outbreak is spiraling completely out of control. Within minutes, Bryan goes from guy trying to make rent to guy trying not to get eaten. And according to Cregger, that transition doesn't really let up for the rest of the film. In interviews, the director has described the movie as feeling like one continuous, escalating sequence. Chaos kicks in early and basically never stops. Here's why that premise works so well for a Resident Evil story specifically. It mirrors exactly how the games make you feel. You're not a super soldier walking in with a plan. You're an ordinary person who wandered into the worst night of their life with nothing but what's in your pockets. Sound familiar? That's Leon Kennedy showing up in Raccoon City for his first day on the job in Resident Evil 2. That's Ethan Winters wandering into a haunted house in Resident Evil 7. The franchise has always worked best when a hero is unprepared and the environment is a real threat. And Cregger clearly understands it on a fundamental level. Rounding out the cast, we got Zach Cherry, Callie Reis, and Paul Walter Hauser in supporting roles. And yes, that a genuinely stacked lineup for what is, on paper, a video game movie. This isn't a paint-by-numbers action franchise cash grab. This is a horror filmmaker being handed a beloved IP and a real budget, and it shows. Now, if the name Zack Cregger doesn't mean anything to you yet, let me fix that real quick, because it's the single biggest reason to be optimistic about this movie. Cregger directed Barbarian in 2022, a film that came out of absolutely nowhere. It became one of the most talked about horror movies of the decade. A movie so committed to its twist that critics were begging people not to spoil it. He followed that up with Weapons, another horror project that cemented him as one of the most exciting genre filmmakers working right now. What both of those films have in common is a very specific skill. Cregger is brilliant at putting ordinary people in absolutely horrifying environments and letting the location itself become the villain. A house that shouldn't exist. A town with a secret. That is structurally the exact same trick that makes the Resident Evil games work. You explore location, and the location slowly reveals that it wants you dead. So when Sony announced that Cregger will be writing and directing a new Resident Evil film with a script he co-wrote alongside Shay, Hatten, the writer behind John Wick, Chapter 4, genre fans took notice immediately. This was a random studio director being handed the keys. This was a horror filmmaker who has publicly talked about how much he loves these games, being given a chance to actually build something around that love. And it hasn't gone unnoticed that Cregger has been very upfront about his personal connection to the franchise. He's talked about beating Resident Evil Requiem, the newest mainline game in the series, twice already. He's talked about which game is his favorite. This isn't someone who Googled Resident Evil lore the week before pre-production. This is someone who has clearly put in hundreds of hours of controller in his hand. That matters, because the last several attempts at adapting this franchise have felt like they were made by people who watched the plot summary once and called it a day. Cregger is doing the opposite. He is stuffing this movie with details specifically for people who know the games best. Which brings us to the reason you're actually here. Okay, this is the part you came for. Let's talk about what's hidden in this trailer. After Bryan hits someone with his car, he tries to get help, and that leads him to an abandoned house that's already been teased in earlier marketing. In an extended look at this house, he heads upstairs and opens a door into what looks like an old office. Sitting right in the center of the frame, a typewriter. If you've never played these games, that might sound like a completely random prop. If you've played these games, you just felt a specific kind of dread wash over you. Because a typewriter is one of the most iconic objects in the entire franchise. In the games, typewriters are save points. The only place you're allowed to record your progress. usually guarded by limited ink ribbon, items that force you to think carefully about when you actually stop to save. Finding one in the middle of an unfamiliar, blood-soaked location has always meant one thing to players. You found a brief moment of safety in a place that was none. Putting it in this movie, in this exact context, is not an accident. It's a direct signal to the audience who grew up with these games that Cregger knows exactly what that object means and exactly what feeling it's supposed to trigger. Here's a deep cut, the one even some hardcore fans almost missed. In a trailer breakdown Cregger did with IGN, he pointed out a plant sitting just off-screen, over Bryan's right shoulder, that most viewers would clock as set dressing and nothing more. According to Cregger, that plant was deliberately designed to resemble the green herb, the franchise's single most recognizable healing item, the one players have been picking up since the very first game in 1996. But he didn't stop there. Cregger revealed he specifically recreated the bucket the herb sits in to match the one seen in Resident Evil 4, down to the horizontal copper detailing. In his own words, he said he pulled that detail directly from 4 because it's his favorite game in the series, and that he scattered other Resident Evil 4 references throughout the film that longtime players would pick up on. Think about the level of intention that takes. This is a background prop in a wide shot that most casual viewers will never consciously register, and the director still went out his way to model it after a specific asset from a specific game, and then talked about it unprompted in a press interview. That's not a marketing team bolting on fan service after fact. That's a director who genuinely cares whether the 3 seconds of screen time spent on a potted plant feels right to the people who spend hundreds of hours in these games. Remember that opening beat I described at the top of this video? Bryan hitting someone with his car, only to realize it's an infected victim? That's not a coincidence either. It's a direct visual echo of 2 things at once. The Resident Evil 2 Remake's iconic opening cutscene, and the intro of 2021's Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City, which use a nearly identical beat. Cregger essentially took one of the franchise's most well-known oh no moments and used it to kick off his own story, which tells you he's not just referencing individual props. He's referencing staging and rhythm from the games and prior films too. Multiple outlets covering the trailer frame by frame have pointed out shotgun shells and other scavenged survival items placed around the environments Bryan moves through. Exactly the kind of item pickups you'd expect to find scattered around a Resident Evil game level. It's a small thing, but it reinforces a sense that this house isn't just a horror movie location. It's built like a level. It's built like something you want to explore with a controller in your hand, not just watch happen to somebody else. Now here's an important wrinkle. Up until this trailer, there had actually been some real frustration from fans. Cregger's film doesn't feature any of the game's iconic characters. No Leon Kennedy, no Jill Valentine, no Chris Redfield. And for months, that led to a vocal chunk of the fan base worrying this was going to be Resident Evil in name only, a generic Outbreak movie wearing the franchise's logo like a costume. This trailer directly answers that criticism. Its closing stinger explicitly named Raccoon City for the first time in marketing, confirming what had only been rumored. The story takes place on the outskirts of the events of Resident Evil 2, running parallel to that game's Outbreak rather than retelling it. It's not a scene-for-scene remake, and it's not starring the game's famous heroes, but it is unmistakably, canonically tied to the world and the timeline fans already know. It's a smart move narratively too, rather than trying to cram Leon and Claire's entire story into a 2-hour runtime for the umpteenth. Cregger gets to tell an original, self-contained story about a nobody caught in the middle of a catastrophe everyone already knows is coming, while games fans watch from a privileged vantage point, catching disasters and creatures of characters on screen don't fully understand yet. Let's sit on that decision for a second, because it's the single most debated choice in this entire production. Cregger has explained his reasoning directly. He didn't want to force iconic characters like Leon or Jill into a movie if it meant making that inclusion feel forced or inorganic to a self-contained story. In other words, he'd rather tell an original story really well than shove in fan-favorite names just to check a box and end up compromising the story he actually wants to tell. It's worth remembering that this franchise has tried to put the game's actual heroes on screen approach before. The Milla Jovovich series ran 6 films loosely inspired by the games, largely inventing its own characters and mythology, and made over $1 billion worldwide despite constant criticism from game fans that it barely resembled the source material. Then 2021's Welcome to Raccoon City swung hard in the opposite direction, trying to faithfully recreate the first 2 games shot for shot of the action and characters, and it landed with a critical and commercial thud. Cregger's approach is a genuine third option. Keep the world, the atmosphere, the mythology, and the item design completely faithful, but build a brand new character to experience it through. Early reactions to this trailer suggest that's exactly the balance a lot of long frustrated fans have been waiting for. It lets the movie feel like Resident Evil without being handcuffed to decades of game canon it would inevitably get raw in someone's eyes. Here's a detail that might surprise you if you're expecting wall-to-wall zombie hordes. Cregger has said flat out that this movie doesn't lean on traditional zombies nearly as much as you'd think. In his own words, he's described the film as being far more focused on weird creature stuff than shambling undead, noting there are really only 2 or 3 scenes in the entire movie featuring proper zombie material, and that most of what's the trailer represents that limited zombie content. Everything else in the film is built around other threats entirely. For anyone who's played the games, that tracks with the franchise's actual DNA more than people often remember. Yes, the original Resident Evil is built around the Spencer Mansion's undead, but the series has spent decades introducing lickers, hunters, mutated tyrants, and increasingly bizarre bioorganic horrors that go way beyond basic zombies. By keeping the trailer's creature reveals deliberately restrained and mysterious, Cregger is protecting the film's biggest surprises for theater, while still signaling that what's coming goes well past standard zombie movie territory. That restraint is honestly refreshing. Plenty of horror trailers show you every kill and every monster before you bought a ticket. This one is confident enough to make you wait. One shot in particular has been getting singled out by nearly every outlet covering this trailer. A moment where Bryan is pressed against a wall, and the camera slowly pulls back to reveal he's actually perched on top of the remains of a collapsing building. It's a kind of striking, vertigo-inducing visual that feels directly pulled from a Resident Evil game's environmental design. Claustrophobic, disorienting, and visually gorgeous all at once. It's a good example of what a lot of critics keep circling back to with this trailer. This isn't just a movie stuffed with prop references. The camera work itself, the framing, the way locations are explored room by room, all of it is built to feel like playing one of these games rather than just watching a plot summary of one. The farmhouse setting, the isolation, the careful placement of familiar items in the background. It all adds up to a production that seems to understand Resident Evil's scariest moments have never really been about jump scares or monsters. They've been about dread, implication, and a sinking feeling that you are completely alone and completely out of your depth. So here's where things stand. Resident Evil is set to hit theaters in IMAX on September 18th, 2026, distributed by Sony through Columbia Pictures, with Constantine Film, Vertigo Entertainment, and PlayStation Productions also producing. Behind the camera, you got cinematographer Dariusz Wolski, whose credits speak for themselves, which explains why even the trailer alone looks noticeably more cinematic than past entries in this franchise. This is also worth putting in context. The Resident Evil film franchise, going all the way back to 2002, has grossed over $1 billion combined worldwide, despite a pretty rocky relationship with critics and often with fans of the games themselves. That a franchise with a massive built-in audience that has, frankly, been waiting a long time for an adaptation that actually respects the source material instead of just borrowing its name. Based on everything in this trailer, the Typewriter, the green herb built for Resident Evil 4, the Raccoon City reveal, Cregger's own public obsession with these games, and a visual approach clearly designed to replicate what it feels like to explore one of these locations yourself. There's a real case to be made that this could be an adaptation that finally gets it right. Is it a guaranteed home run? Of course not. Trailers have burned us before, and there's always a gap between a great 2-minute cut and a great 2-hour movie. But between the pedigree of the director, the specificity of these references, and the sheer amount of care clearly baked into details most viewers will never even consciously notice, this is shaping up to be the most promising Resident Evil movie in the franchise's history. So that's every Easter egg, every callback, and every reason to be genuinely excited about Zack Cregger's Resident Evil, landing in theaters September 18, 2026. Which detail caught you most off guard? Was it the Resident Evil 4 herb bucket, the Typewriter, or the Raccoon City reveal at the very end? Drop your pick in the comments, and let me know if you think this finally breaks the franchise's curse with critics. If you want more trailer breakdowns like this one the moment they drop, make sure you're subscribed and you got that notification bell on, because this is not the last time we're coming back to Raccoon City before September. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.